Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Give Me Some Truth International. And the topic for today is going to be rollover decisions for expats. So just to set the stage here a little bit, let's go over some of the really basic concepts. So if you're an employee here in the US, usually you're given the option to participate in some sort of retirement account, right? So typically that would be a 401k.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the most common one that folks have, right?
Depending on your employer, it could also be something like a 403b, but one way or another, you'd be given the opportunity to contribute and accumulate wealth in that particular account. Now, if you leave your employer, you then have a choice, right? Because you now have options. You have the option, if you wish, to roll over that particular account to an IRA. And I would say that's a pretty easy, simple decision if you look at it purely from a, US perspective. And what we're going to talk about today is how that decision may be a little bit different if you apply it to your situation as an American abroad, as an American expat.
Or even someone, I would say, preparing to move abroad in certain cases.
Absolutely.
Well, right? Yeah. Because if you're, these are things, if you're thinking about retiring in a foreign country, that can really have a big effect on your tax rate and your tax bill in the country that you live in. Here in the U.S., Stan, I jump in here, but like you said, it's a pretty straightforward decision, mostly because people don't want to, people are changing jobs more often, and they just don't want to hit the end of their career with like 5 different 401ks, and we've seen that, right?
Yes,
where
very much so.
Move along and just to simplify people's lives, and as they're getting older as well, and they have, thoughts about that, it's like, you don't want to go to 5 different companies to help track down the assets.
Exactly. Yeah, consolidating your assets is a big reason why people would choose to roll over. And sometimes also people want more control. They want more investment choices.
Yeah,
and
choice is a big factor.
Choice is a huge factor.
And if there is a controversy over the rollover decision, if there is a compliance or an ethical debate about the rollover decision in the United States, it usually centers around the fact that there's a cottage industry of annuity and insurance-based business that tries to convince people that they're much better off de-risking that retirement nest egg by rolling out of their 401k or similar type plan and putting it in something that's got downside protection. And lo and behold, these products are extremely profitable to sell, right?
Absolutely.
Extremely profitable. It's a great idea for the person that's pitching it, right? The question is for the retiree,
right? Do
they end up in a vehicle that is less liquid and difficult to get out of, expensive to get out of, and expensive to keep as well, right? With very high fees that, downside protection is usually, also upside protection, right? We'll protect you from any upside you might appreciate in your retirement account.
Now,
but I digress, right?
We don't want to get attacked, but today is not about.
That's fine.
We'll just take on the insurance companies.
Yeah, we've already offended an entire industry. It's not even 9 o'clock here. It's going to be a long day.
I think it does. Right? The issue of choice, I think, is an important one for clients moving abroad, and one where it may make sense to look at the conversion, even if you're happy with your current 401k.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of cases, if you're moving abroad, the 401k may have one international fund.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if you're moving to, certain countries, you may want to have more exposure to the local currency. You may want to have control of how much of your assets are in euros. You may want a foreign bond fund that isn't tied to the U.S. dollar.
Absolutely.
So that choice idea is very, very important.
Absolutely, it's key.
I mean, as advisors, we realize that for people that are managing their own retirement accounts, that having an all-encompassing, equity fund for U.S., an all-encompassing equity fund for foreign investments, and a bond fund.
Right.
Like the more simple it is, if you don't have professional training and experience, maybe chances are that's going to be an elegant solution for you. But
Right.
to the extent that you are now facing a complex cross-border tax situation in your life, where there are rules that apply to the type of investments that work best, and so on. The IRA is a place where if there's a lot of inhibition put on how you can invest your taxable account, but you're pretty much free of those rules, like maybe you can't buy ETFs, right?
Yeah.
Or, whatever. The IRA can be a great, an important part of the diversification. Right.
Right.
Because of all of the choices that you're not blocked from.
Yeah, I think of the classic case of the UK where you have HMRC funds.
Yes.
For the longest time, you couldn't find an HMRC reporting UK stock fund, right?
Right.
And now that has changed over time, but that the IRA became the great spot to hedge your, pound risk, invest in your local country, do all of that because it was protected from those tax rules.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of reasons why you should consider, rolling over if you're moving abroad. I also think, and this is important, when you're in the accumulation phase, having 90% of your portfolio being in a global stock fund and 10% being in a bond fund, in a lot of cases is pretty good because most people aren't looking at their IRA for a near-term investment.
Right.
But as you get to that point where you're starting to be in retirement and you're drawing down and you're maybe in a foreign country where the capital gains rate isn't as friendly as it is in the United States, looking at figuring out where I'm going to draw from, which, bucket I'm going to pour from, which string I'm going to tug on, whatever, analogy you want to use, I think changes a little bit. And so the IRA or the 401k becomes a little bit more important from that standpoint. And Stan, you just wrote an article on another kind of wrinkle about it, right?
Yeah. I mean, here and here is something that is also important for many retirees or soon-to-be retirees that want to go overseas. It is something that is seldom, if ever, discussed, and certainly, not something that domestic advisory is going to grapple with, right? And that is the wrinkle that the tax treaties that the United States has entered into with various countries. There are roughly about 100 income tax treaties that the U.S. has entered into with other countries where you might choose to live. Some of those, many of those treaties, I mean, they all tend to have somewhat of a pattern, right? I mean, the U.S. goes into these negotiations with a blueprint, and the blueprint,
they're based on templates. Absolutely.
Right? It's a template. Like, it's just like any good lawyers, right?
Right.
It's like let's make it as simple as possible, and let's drag it out for years, right? And that's
Stan,
treaty negotiation.
Former lawyer, I know how to do this very well.
I know from which I speak on this.
I was going to say also, Stan, we're not paying you by the hour for this podcast.
I know.
Good reminder.
So moving along, there are tax treaties out there, and if you are a resident of a counterparty to a U.S. treaty, you need to understand that treaty, or you need to work with people that understand that treaty from a tax and legal perspective, right? And many of these treaties have rules with regard to regular pensions and regular income, and then separate articles for government service income or public service income. And that includes public pensions, right? And by public pension, I mean from public service, as opposed to Social Security, which is also separately dealt with in treaties, right? But today we're talking about the person who works for the federal government and has participates in the TSP, or in a defined benefit pension with the federal government, perhaps. But beyond that, it's very broad, right? So it is the U.S. government or any political subdivision thereof, which would include state government, local government. It would include, such things as a public transit authority. If you work for the public transit authority, if you worked for, if you were a professor at a university, if you were a kindergarten teacher.
Public university, yeah.
Public university, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So public service, broadly construed at any local, at local, state, or federal level, right? Government service income is oftentimes, the rule goes that, and it's completely opposite of the way it would usually otherwise go. Usually the taxing authority rests with your residence country. But with government service income, your income from government service is taxed in the country from whence that income originated, right? So if you worked for the U.S. government, that income is only taxable on your U.S. federal return, right? If you were, if obviously part of the diplomatic corps, but you're still working, and you're working for the embassy in Belgium, you're not paying Belgian income tax on your federal U.S. income, right? Right. So, from pension standpoint, this is profound, because the next paragraph of that usual treaty template applies and says that pension income derived from public service shall be taxable only in the state where that income arose, from which that income arose, right? So if you're, a high school teacher and you decide to go retire in Spain, Spain has such a treaty provision, right? Then you have a 403B and you take a distribution from it. By treaty, that's not taxable in Spain, right? Now, you need to probably make some kind of claim and disclose it in Spain. Well, but you're only paying tax in the U.S., right?
Here's where I would, jump up and down and wave hands and say, be very careful.
Away.
Yes. Even if you worked for the federal government and you have a TSP, this is a good case where maybe just going to a local accountant, working through that you have this tax treaty claim, make sure it's, they know how to understand it. They have experience working with it.
Yes.
So that they can make that claim for you. Because one of the things that we found is frequently, many times, the local equivalent of the IRS unaware of these tax treaties, right? Unaware of certain things that are going on, unaware of these nuances, unaware of a lot of these things. So it's a good idea to get here local counsel. This is not something we would really... if you have a TSP, it's a little more clear cut.
Yeah.
But if you have a 403B, a lot of times they'll go, 403B sounds a lot like 401k. And,
I mean, you're right. Anything is possible in the local experience with the local tax authority people, right? And again, yes, if your treaty claim is not properly set forth and you don't initiate it, it doesn't exist.
Right. I mean, in the keys, your treaty position hinges on whether or not that income comes from truly from a government source. And so, like you said, in some cases, that could be pretty obvious and straightforward. But here in the United States, for example, we have universities that are kind of mixed. They are, they have funding from private and government sources. And, there might need to be, a decision made as to whether or not that truly constitutes a form of, government income. Yeah. So you need to work with a local accountant to make sure that the position you're taking makes sense in the context of, local law in the country where you live, and that it's a conservative position and that you can apply it consistently over time. And so
But the important upshot here,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, all of these disclaimers, consult your local, your residence country tax professional, consult your U.S. accountant, make sure that treaty claims are being made where appropriate, right? But all of that aside, like the caveat here, or the important issue, is that now we have a situation where if you're in a higher tax jurisdiction than the United States, having that public pension is a huge potential tax saver compared to having a private pension.
Having an IRA. Right.
And so,
having an IRA or just having a 401k. But leaving those public pension funds in a public pension could actually result in less tax owed than if you had rolled it over, right? So this is,
And this is a case where I would say, because of our duty as fiduciaries, right?
Yes.
A lot of, we've seen there's controversy here in the United States where non-fiduciaries are trying to get people to roll over their 401k, 403b, TSP into their product no matter what. Our duty requires this before we roll any of these things over. And our knowledge, I think, of where you're going and the knowledge of the tax treaties means that we can stand there and stop you and say, hey, we may not want to roll this over.
Yeah.
This may not make sense
Absolutely.
to roll over.
Right.
This is,
And I think that's really the important thing to take this away from this is, maybe, instead of to roll over or not to roll over, we can say we're standing atop your 403b, yelling stop or whatever you want to say, standing athwart history, yelling stop, I think is the line I was going for. But that it's not such an automatic decision.
It's
Right.
not. And it's really, this is...
And it's not automatic that you don't, by the way.
Right. No, absolutely.
Right.
And so this is a good example of a very simple decision, financial decision that you would make as a local U.S. resident that could look very different once you move abroad or as you're preparing to move abroad, right? Because in summary, this is a situation where, it would be a bad financial move. You would effectively shoot yourself in the foot by
your tax
rolling over your 403b to an IRA. So it's a great example. It shows the importance of reviewing treaties. And I have to say, having reviewed a lot of treaties myself, many of them don't really have that many real tangible benefits for Americans, unfortunately.
Very few tangible
Right.
benefits for Americans.
Savings
But
clause,
Mostly
But this is one
tangible
of them.
benefits for foreigners that invest
Right.
in the United States.
But yeah,
Right.
this is one example of
It is.
a true benefit that is available to Americans abroad. You just need to know how to navigate it and make the most
and how
of
to
it.
conduct yourself not only in your financial arrangements and whether or not to roll over, but also potentially in your immigration efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because there's a caveat about the public pension and the public service income, and that is that if you become a citizen of the other country, or you happen to be a citizen of the other country, in this case, the residence country, it's all
That
off.
benefit goes away.
Now the residence country has primary right of taxation, even if it's from a government service pension from back in the United States.
Very important point.
Yeah.
So that might affect whether or not you want to stay a permanent resident or pick up that passport. Or you might be in a situation where, there's just so many different caveats, and the point here is that these are the type of more complex issues that we help with, clients who are preparing to make a move or have made a move abroad.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That merit your attention and that may merit further discussion.
Absolutely. And we're out of time for today. So if you want more information on this topic, I'd encourage you to check out Stan's article, which is available on our website. And with that, we'll wrap it up for today, and we'll see you next time for another episode of Give Me Some Truth International.
Walkner Condon Financial Advisors is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The opinions expressed by the participants of this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Walkner Condon Financial Advisors. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. Thanks for listening, and for further information, please visit WalknerCondon.com.